For Creamer Media's Polity, I'm Shannon de Rehove. Political cartoonist Dov Fedler joins me to discuss his memoir, Out of Line. You have been drawing cartoons for more than 45 years, but you've said that being a political cartoonist was last on your wish list. How did you become a political cartoonist?
It's a long story. I was working in advertising and I couldn't last in any job, and then I moved to the agency of my very first art director, who had someone working freelance as a copywriter who knew Percy Banashik, who was then writing for the Rand Daily Mail. He said, "Would you like to draw for newspapers?" I said, "Oh boy, would I like to draw for newspapers." So she introduced me to Percy Banashik, and I used to draw for him on the Rand Daily Mail, but I was so green, I was in my early 20s, and if all my drawings were like smaller than a centimeter by one column, and I didn't realize I could draw it larger. So it was like, writing the Lord's Prayer on the head of a pin. That was my introduction into newspaper. Then Percy Banashik, the Argus, created a newspaper called the Sunday Chronicle, and Percy Banashik was appointed arts editor, and they were looking for a cartoonist. So he suggested me to the editor, a man called Pat O'Malley. So I got onto this newspaper, which was, an independent newspaper as it is now. And for 2 years, I had this newspaper to myself. I used to do about 10 illustrations a week. But they couldn't get the advertising. The newspaper died, and all the staff of the Chronicle moved on to the Star. So now I started drawing for the Star, but it was always magazine-type stuff. In those days, the magazine section of the newspaper was a big thing. Now you see nothing. You used to get a lot of illustration. So I left my last job in advertising in 1968, and I went in on the strength of the freelance work that I had from the Star and one other job. And in 1969, the man who mentored me as an editor is a man called Jack Cross. He's still alive. He's 91. And one day, the then editor, René de Villiers, decided that he wanted me to draw political cartoons. I said, "I know nothing about politics. I know nothing." He says, "Well, you either do it or he'll get someone else." I said, "Sure, I can do political cartoons." So my very first cartoon was about the landing on the moon. It just coincided. It's a hell of a date. And that's where it started, and it grew.
Your earliest dream was to work for Walt Disney, and you got to visit Disney World once. However, you say you couldn't wait to leave. Tell us about this visit.
Well, I was 39 years old, got the opportunity to go to Disney World, and I knew so much about it. I wanted to see these animatronic robots. There was the New York World's Fair, which I think was in 1963, and for that, Walt Disney declared to his guys, "I want walking, talking robots." There was no technology, and they created these audio animatronic robots by his instruction. And they had this thing at Disney World called the Hall of the Presidents. And all the presidents sit in a semicircle, and Abraham Lincoln stands up and he speaks. And I wanted to see this thing and not much else. And I arrived, and the thing when you get to Disney World, you are processed like a sardine. You are shuffled through at every point. There's no, you can't stand and linger over something. And it's all plastic, I can't explain. And when Abraham Lincoln got up to speak, you could almost hear the gears creaking. It was good, but it didn't blow me away. And it was an incredibly hot day because that's in Florida. It was clammy, and we weren't staying at the fancy hotel, and we needed to get near the swimming pool. And we found a way of my wife's relative told us how to sneak in to get to this man-made beach in this landlocked place. And the sand is as white as snow. And we sat down on the sand, and I picked up the sand. It was plastic. And we'd seen a few sites that day, and we were booked for 2 days, and my wife and I got back to our motel, and she said, well, do you want to stay on? I said, no, because you couldn't get to Epcot in those days. It wasn't yet ready. So, well, I said, I've had enough, let's go. It was a lot like the things about America which are grand, but that is not one of them.
You have covered the careers of hundreds of politicians, athletes and celebrities. Which of these do you enjoy drawing the most and why?
It's very easy for me to draw Jacob Zuma because I've sussed him out. He sort of has a Homer Simpson look about him. You know, so I've worked out a technique of drawing him. I also enjoyed drawing Madiba Mandela because I also sussed out his face. Let's go to the faces I had difficulty with. It's a much easier question because your question implies that I can draw anybody, anytime. It doesn't work that way. I always had trouble drawing F.W. de Klerk. And I don't know if it's because of his face or because of his politics. I was always ambivalent about what he looks like. You're not quite sure what the expression, and they're not well-defined features. Great faces going back in time. Pit Kurnoff, everybody liked to draw big ears, long nose. Buthelezi, I used to enjoy drawing way back then, because once you find a style for the face, it became easy. I struggled with Thabo Mbeki for a long time, and sometimes I do a great drawing of him, then I do an absolutely terrible drawing of him. No one else seemed to notice, but I do. So at the top there is our current president. I'm trying to draw Baleka Mbete at the moment, and I'm struggling because I'm not sure. She's got a bit of a scowl, but if you make too much of a scowl, there's a lot of practical stuff there. I'm not that consummate artist who can just do that and it jumps out. It doesn't work that way for me.
You state that there are no coincidences in your life, rather that you believe the hand of destiny has steered your path. Please elaborate on this statement.
Well, that's from the blurb at the back of the book, which is, I suppose, when you read the whole context of the thing, yeah, because, yes, there's certainly a destiny there because there are too many incidents in my life that are the moment of their occurring is just, my whole life would have been entirely different if not for that particular encounter at that moment. So my very first job interview, and I had this worst, I don't know how far you've got into the book, but I had this horrible portfolio. I call it the Springtime for Hitler portfolio. It was so untidy, and at art schools it had to look good. But I got an interview through some relative who knew somebody in advertising with a top art director in the top advertising agency in the town. And I walked in with this rubbish portfolio, but I happened to bring sketchbooks with me. And I walked in and I was doing a Mr. Bean. I was dropping everything all over the place. And this guy was not even looking at my portfolio, he was just paging through my stuff. Became my great mentor. And he said, I don't have a job for you, but I'm going to make a job for you. Now then, he left that agency, his name was Stuart Wilson, and I begged him to give me a job. He was starting his own agency. He said, I can't afford it. I said, give me a job, please, let me come work for you. I went to work for him, and I met that person who introduced me to Percy Banashik there. Percy Banashik, the Star, boom, working for the Star.
Your book is described as being an autobiography, but also an attempt to capture a particular history of a specific generation. Why did you want to do that? What do you hope your readers will gain from your memoir?
That wasn't an intention, the history. The history is incidental, and I wanted to write it down because I enjoyed it so much. And I'd felt, I don't think, this sounds arrogant, but I don't think anyone has done it as I've done it, because it's a very accurate picture. And no one that I know of, you can't compare our experience, for example, to the American experience. A lot of Jewish American writers, most notably Philip Roth. But these guys, and Mordecai Richler, but these guys have a kind of a love-hate relationship with their background. I have no problem with it. I'm glad, I grew up with this language, Yiddish, just a marvelous language. It's so rich, it's better than Afrikaans, it's got more metaphor, it's got more humor, etc. And I just wanted, I wrote my first draft before I wrote Out of Line was more about my parents and my grandfather, because their stories are amazing. And it was called The High Windows. And if you understand Afrikaans, the Yiddish is similar to German, Die Hoge Fensters, the high windows. Who lives in high windows? Rich people. And it was this history. It had not one iota of humor in it. And I was in the shower, and I'd given up the book. I'd done it. I'd submitted it. I'd been rubbished by one particular critic, and I thank him to this day for doing that. And in the shower, the sentence jumps into my head. "You'll be a dentist," says Dad. And the moment I heard my dad's voice, and the writer said, "Dad, find your voice, find your..." What is the voice? The voice. They talk about the voice. It's that, you recognize it, and you write it down, and that thing came down. In 3 months it was done, the entire book. So, to say that I started out to write this history, that's incidental, absolutely.
You are a pure product of Johannesburg, having never been to Europe or even venturing to Brakpan. What is your fondest memory of the bustling city of gold?
Sundays at the Zoo Lake, rowing, going on a rowboat on the Zoo Lake. Oh wow, you could go right around the island in those days. And there would be a band, a military band. There was this gazebo where they, on a Sunday afternoon, it was very, we used to drive, and we used to pile into that Hudson like you see in taxis. 6, 7, 8 of laps, and that was the treat, because it was trees and that I would say is my all-time favourite memory.
You have your finger on the pulse of South African politics. What is your hope for South Africa? What would you like to say to the leaders of this country?
You see that phrase, finger on the pulse. You only take finger on the pulse when somebody's dying. What else would you take a pulse? Everybody seems to think I'm so informed. Well, I read fewer newspapers than anyone else. I get the Star. I don't read the Mail and Guardian or the other papers. I don't have a flood of papers on my table every day. I listen to the radio. I listen to 702. I switch on to the news. Looking forward, we are, with what's going on now, there's a big shake-up going on, and we also happen to be in a deep trough, not just because of what's going on with our government now. There's a lot of xenophobia and hatred and it's race against race. But things in their own way are taking their time to evolve. So, you go to a restaurant, and down the road where we go, Doppio Zero, you see mixed couples. It's the common thing. In my day, it was unheard of. If you saw a black woman with a white man, or a white woman with a black woman, it was a shock. When I was 17, there was a movie called Carmen Jones. It was a movie, they converted Carmen, the opera, into a movie, modernized it. with 2 black actors. The whole cast was black. It was unheard of. Things are moving to a better place everywhere because of the information. The information highway is wide open. You can't bury, you can't fool any of the people any of the time anymore. It's over. It's over for, and that, what's happening here is they're losing control, this fist hold on the information, and that's, so it will change. And look, we're in for some rough times, but I hope it'll be all right. I don't think I'll be around then, but that's okay. I don't want to live forever.
That was political cartoonist Dov Fedler speaking to Creamer Media's Polity about his memoir, Out of Line.